start. Hi, everyone. I'm Judith Hank with Beyond Plastics, and we are so delighted to welcome you this evening um, to this incredible discussion on the intersection of art and activism. Beyond Plastics is a wonderful uh, organization based at Bennington College in Vermont. We work to eliminate plastic pollution everywhere, and we could not do this without the involvement of volunteers from all over the country, including some distinguished artists that you'll hear from this evening. The plastics issue is just getting worse. And we started working on plastics because of the health impacts, the climate change impacts, environmental justice impacts, the fact that we're turning our ocean into a landfill, and certainly our disappointment that plastic recycling has been an abysmal failure. We do a lot of programming. Go to our website, please, beyondplastics.org. Just this week, we will be having a webinar on plastics and health, particularly how little shards of plastic enter your brain and your heart arteries. And that's, Andrew, is it this Thursday night or Wednesday night at 7 o'clock Eastern?
This Thursday, 7 p.m. Eastern.
Thank you. So this Thursday, mark your calendar. You're going to spend 2 nights with us this week, tonight and Thursday night at 7 to learn about plastics and health. I want to thank all of our artists attending tonight and my colleague, Kathy Jenkins, who is the development director at Beyond Plastics. And we've invited you all here tonight because you know that artists have really been in the forefront of so many social change movements, whether it's the civil rights movement, the environmental movement from 50 years ago, work against sexism and patriarchy, education. We don't get change unless artists are intimately involved. This slide you see that says plastic kills, those are postcards and also a lovely big poster that I carried during the People's Climate March a few years ago in Manhattan. And this was made by artists who are active with Beyond Plastics Greater Boston. And we're so excited to have that kind of art to be sharing with the public. So thanks to Eileen and others with Greater Boston Beyond Plastics for creating this. With this design, you see that you as artists can translate issues in our culture through your creative lens and provide a new reality. Many artists today are really concerned about environmental contamination issues and are using plastic waste from our modern world and converting some of that into artwork. Because of the concerns about the environment, artists literally around the world are creating art from plastics from our domestic waste stream. Artists are pulling plastic out of rivers and the ocean, and their artwork is really, it's not a disposal method for plastic, but the artwork brings attention to these serious issues, ironically, often in a really beautiful way, in a serious way, and sometimes with very humorous creations. So the job of the artist is to synthesize this current issue of plastic pollution, whether personal or political, and embody creations, enabling all of us to understand the issue at a much deeper level. It's much more interesting and evocative to look at art with a plastics message as opposed to reading one of my fact sheets, which can just cause you to put you into deep slumber in the middle of the day. Art wakes us all up to the creative possibilities of change. So any form of art is a form of power. Okay? Any type of art is a form of power. It has impact. It can affect change. It can move us, and it can move institutions. I just want to show you a slide. Next slide, please. Of an amazing piece of art on display in Albany just this past Wednesday Beyond Plastics and our allies in Albany organized a big lobby day in support of a Packaging Reduction and Recycling Infrastructure Act and Bigger, Better Bottle Bill, which we're working around the clock to pass. This beautiful art is by Chrysanth Gross, and it's called Plastic Tsunami. And Chrysanth, who lives in Putnam County, maybe Westchester County, carries this to Albany a couple times a year when we ask her to join us at advocacy days. And when we're holding it up and it's a little heavy and lawmakers pass by, they stop and talk to us. Chrysanth talks about how so much is this plastic, single-use plastic, is just from her family over a short period of time. And as I was able to snap this picture from the third floor, and I think it's just a wonderful example of the intersection of art and activism and is reaching policymakers in Albany. So welcome tonight. You're going to hear from three incredible artists. We'll have times for questions and answers. We just dropped Chrysanth's site in the chat, and we're delighted that you joined us tonight.
Thank you, Judith. As Judith mentioned, we have three wonderful artists this evening, and I am going to introduce our first artist, Anne-Katrin Spiess. Her work merges conceptual and practical aspects of land art. Her love of landscapes has grown into a deep concern for the ecology of the planet, which is reflected in some of her more socially engaged projects that directly address climate change and topical environmental issues. Her work is generally ephemeral. She documents it through photography, video, and text. As an ecological artist, she makes installations that address urgent environmental issues. She has made work about trash, desertification, deforestation, and is intensely involved in projects addressing the global single-use plastics crisis. The aim of her current Death by Plastics project, in which her body rests in a clear plexiglass casket covered by single-use plastics, is to attract attention to the single-use plastics problem and suggest ways to move forward. She believes in the work of Beyond Plastics because of the immense impact that our organization is having on the single-use plastics cause. Katrin, take it away.
So thank you so much, Kathy, for this great introduction. And thank you, Judith and Kathy, for having me on this presentation. And I feel so blessed to be in the company of two great artists, Christy Rupp and Tracy Penn. I'm really looking forward to doing this all together. So as Kathy mentioned, I'm a land artist, and what that means is I create temporary installations and performance work in nature, mostly wide open deserts out west. And the slide you see all the way on the left upper corner is my studio for traveling. That's an Airstream trailer. And thanks to that, I can spend several months of the year in very remote landscapes and do my projects. On the very right side, you see a thinking box, which is one of the first series of projects I was doing. It's a private space for contemplation and meditation that can be installed in any indoor and outdoor space. And I install this in many amazing landscapes around the West. And it's in one of these thinking boxes that I was really inspired to, I almost got a message from the universe, which said, if you're doing projects in great landscapes and in great nature, you need to address environmental issues. So when you see, and so the two slides in the middle, the little tree and the red soil are my beginnings of, I decided I want to just look at what's in nature from a different perspective, from a different lens, and then kind of go from there. I also, one more thing, I create things a lot of times from materials I find just in nature and with my body, sometimes from materials I find at the local hardware store. So on the lower left side, you see a river bath, which is just rocks, a river, and my body. Next slide. So, in Utah, as I was documenting things with my plexiglass cubes, I started coming across a lot of trash in very remote sites, and also along this beautiful scenic desert highway south of Moab. And so I decided to adopt 1 mile of this highway. And one day, on a scorching day of August, actually 2 days, I decided to clean up every single piece of trash I was finding on both sides of this highway and to document it. And I ended up with a number of bags of trash and then also 12 bags of recyclables, which is on the right top side. And right after this, I was invited to participate in an exhibition celebrating the closing of Freshkills landfill, which was at the time the largest landfill on the planet. And it was located in Staten Island, New York, so just off of Manhattan. And so what I did is I went to Staten Island, found a beautiful beach. This is called South Beach, collected all the trash I could find. And this time, I decided to display my findings in these tall plexiglass containers. You see it in the middle slide on the bottom. And they were just a little bit higher than a human walking around. And my aim with this project was to inform the visitors to the exhibition about what kind of impact the materials we use and the things we buy are having on the planet. So I didn't want to accuse the visitors of creating trash and pollution. I wanted to let them know what kind of difference it makes between buying a drink in a plastic bottle rather than an aluminum bottle or a glass bottle. Or so it was a very informational type of exhibit. Next slide. So now we're back in Utah. Once I had collected all that trash on the highway and recyclables, I needed to find a way to take my recyclables to a recycling center. And I ended up driving with my Airstream to Moab, which was the nearest recycling center 2 hours away. And I got up there, it's called Recycle Center. And the place was mostly abandoned. The containers were falling apart. The signage was falling off. There was nobody there. And I took a big breath, took my plastic bags out with all the recyclables, and I left them there praying that they would eventually be taken to to the right recycling facility. So now, fast forward the slide on the right. I have, over the years, I made Moab and Southern Utah the focus and the center of a lot of my projects. So year after year after year, I would be going back to the recycle center. And the recycle center grew into this beautiful, very inspiring recycling place. And people would go up there. It was almost a pilgrimage. And you were feeling, it was a sacred experience of putting every single piece you had in your bag into the right container. People would bring their enlarging loops so they would get the right plastic into the right container. And it was just fun. It was great to see how that whole, recycling experience evolved. Okay, next slide. So then I get back to the recycle center in September of 2019 with my bag of plastic, glass, aluminum. And there are signs at the recycle center saying, we only now accept plastics number 1. We do not accept plastics 1 and 2. We do not accept plastics number 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And I was like, what's happening here? So I found one of the attendants and I said, what's going on? And that was the first time I actually heard about the fact that China has been for decades accepting this country's recycling and plastic, but also most of the world's plastics. And they finally decided to refuse to accept all our plastics. And it turns out in the United States, we do not have infrastructure to recycle most plastics. So what was happening? The plastics were going to landfill or being incinerated. And I felt like I had been hit by lightning. Truly, I almost dropped it. So I spent a sleepless night thinking about this. And then finally around 5 o'clock in the morning, I had a vision. And I had a vision of my body in a clear container on a landfill and covered by plastic containers. So right away, I went online and I looked for some kind of email address of somebody at the recycle center that I could connect with. And I composed an email. I said, I'm an artist. This is what I do. And I have this idea. Is it possible? And since it was just a random email address, I thought it might take a few months till I hear back. By 7 o'clock in the morning, I get a reply from a person called Sarah Melnikoff. Turns out Sarah Melnikoff is the goddess of sustainability and recycling and a lot of other things in Moab. And she said, let's do it. So it took us about 3 weeks to convince the director of the landfill to let us do this. And we finally did it on a scorching hot day at the end of September. It was very windy, so trash was flying all over the place. It was very hot. And it's a miracle we were all alive in the end because we had to breathe so much trash coming into our lungs. And eventually, the 2 local newspapers published a little write-up about this project. And next slide. I decided to post this. Yes.
We're just now at the 10-minute mark, so we've just got a little bit more time if you want to keep going, and we'll add a few more minutes.
Keep going. Okay. This is Death by Plastic in Venice. And on a gondola going around the canals. Next slide. This is these are all the articles that came out on the Italian newspapers. Next slide. This is a funeral procession in New York City. Next slide. This is the informational materials I hand out at every procession. Next slide. This is Death by Plastic in Boston with our amazing Death by Plastic activist, Eileen, who's produced Death by Plastic by herself several times. Next slide. And here's the last one, south of Spain, Almeria region, where the entire coast of Almeria is covered in plastics from the greenhouses. And I decided to do Death by Plastic covered with the vegetables of the Almeria region that are grown underneath plastic greenhouses. And I'm passing the baton to great plastics activist and amazing friend, Christy Rupp.
Thank you so much, Katrin. I'm noticing that we've already got some people with their hands up. We'll be taking questions at the end of the presentation. So I will now introduce our second artist, Christy Rupp. Ever since her emergence as an artist and activist in Manhattan in the late 1970s, Christy has used art to understand the human definition of natural. Through her artwork, she directly addresses the intersection of geopolitics, culture, and economics as they impact the vulnerabilities of ecosystems. About her work, Christy says, "Foundational in my art practice is the intersection of animal behavior and the environment. As I started to learn more about how the science of economics impacts habitat, pretty much everything I've made since then flows from the waste stream, the creation and persistence of garbage, and how that waste has defined the world we live in today. I study economics as if it were a natural system which has been corrupted. The ravages of oil spills, industrial pollutants, pesticides, and climate chaos have made me an eco-artist. Christy believes in the mission of Beyond Plastics because although plastic pollution is a terrible problem, she loves working on it because it is solvable with support from government regulation and producer responsibility. Christy?
Thank you very much to everybody who made this come together. This is a photo of a piece called Rat Patrol. It was a postering campaign I did when I first landed in New York after art school. Since the late 70s, I've been involved with issues of animal behavior, waste, habitat, and the connection it has to consumption and capitalism. Today, there's a word for it. It's called discard studies, an interdisciplinary field of research that studies systems of waste, including but beyond traditional trash and garbage. At first, back in the 70s, I was fascinated by observing the activity of rats all over Lower Manhattan because they point out that trash is a habitat and has value. This was never intended as a defense of them, but a way to point out to pedestrians that an area was an active rat invitation, as it called attention to uncollected trash, and it pointed out that the city is a living ecosystem with a delicate balance. Next. As a sculptor, I am interested in formal ideas like volume and materials, but with this interest must also come a consideration of the void inside a volume. And as I've learned more about the plastics problem, I see it as a giant void in our perception. We buy a plastic container full of product, use it briefly, but that void and that shell left remains long past our lifetime. We fail to see that part, and we pay for it not only with our money, but our health and freedom and the health of future generations that must live with climate change, bad air, water, and chemical intrusions into our bodies, our communities, and our politics. Next. These were called red tide. They're a couple of 5-foot sea turtles. I think we're somewhere in the 80s. So in the late 80s, thinking that detergent jugs were like a message in a bottle, I started collecting and making them into marine mammals or animals. Mostly at that time, I was fascinated with the relationship of detergents and advertising, thinking really about water quality and phosphates discharged into streams and rivers. Next. Noting that cleaning products were named after natural phenomena like dawn, cascade, breeze, ivory, surf, on and on. Next. And they even advertise themselves as healthy for nature. But what's actually happening is that plastic waste is threatening the resiliency of ecosystems. And it's interesting also to think about the concept of what's free. If we're buying the detergent, then the container is free, right? But we know that's not true because of the heavy carbon footprint of making and disposing of the single-use container. It's a hidden front-end cost that we're not meant to think about. Next. Years later, I started to collect the unsolicited credit cards that arrived in the mail, first admiring their graphics and noting the permanence and their function as material. I thought, I can't throw this stuff out. It's good plastic. It must be good for something. So after a while, I started making them into threatened species like pangolins, as these are, the most trafficked animal in the world. Things like pangolins, manatees, and frogs to visually represent the paradox comparing the world of finance, which is created and manipulated by humans, to the biosphere, which is impossible to manipulate. It's much easier to destroy it than repair. I was also thinking about extinction and how we really can't know accurate numbers for vanishing species. In the same way that you may never know the amount of interest you will owe on a credit card because it's impossible to calculate. They both deal in unknowable numbers or speculation. And I just think the two systems are really interesting, and I wanted to make them collide a little bit. Next. As well as being a void, plastic is also a skin, and it's made its way through ours and into our blood, and as Judith commented, into our brains. Just as it's been found by researchers to penetrate sediments dating back as early as the 1700s, as they found in Latvia. And that challenges all we understand about geological history and the dating of eras. So it turns out that each of us ingests up to 5 grams of plastic per week, which is about the equivalent of a credit card. So here's a sculpture I made to imagine my stomach after a year, and it's made of 52 credit cards. Next. A couple of years ago, I tried to learn more about the size of the stomach for various whale species. As a non-professional, I often use a Google search for introductory research. What I learned, according to the internet, is that a whale's stomach is defined by the amount of plastic it can hold, or how much it takes to cause a fatality. You really can't find a photo that doesn't show the two connected in a lethal outcome. They're joined forever in our perception, and that's just scary. Next. So for years, I've been thinking about microplastics as they're absorbed by plankton and other life forms. And I've been working on a large group of filter feeding organisms to make visible the countless varieties of tiny plants and animals that float with the currents as they filter nutrients and pollutants alike. They're the foundation of the marine food web, consumed by most aquatic species, and they bioaccumulate up the food chain until they reach our plate. And it's really interesting to note that both the largest whales and the tiniest plankton are both filter feeders. Next. So this is a representation of an aquatic larva made from single-use plastic trash. I made a lot of them. Some are growing from an egg sac, which references the harm done to embryonic development by microplastics. So to wrap up, what I'm interested in exploring in this work is the cost of what it takes to live in a clean world, and how corporate dominance, especially by the fossil fuel industry, makes these things appear fungible and replaceable with man-made currency and financial transactions. But it leaves ecosystems behind, erasing them as collateral damage. Thank you. Now I pass it on to Tracy.
Thank you, Christy. And now for our third and last artist for the evening. Tracy Penn is an environmental artist working in encaustic and found material. She uses upcycled materials to showcase the beauty that can be created from the discarded and to raise awareness about the need to reduce the creation and consumption of plastics. She did her artistic training at the Art Students League of New York, the International Center of Photography, and the New York School for Interior Design. Tracy created the installation Ubiquitous: Microplastics in the Body to bring attention to the harm created by the oil and packaged goods industries, the proliferation of microplastics in the human body, and the associated health risks. The immersive installation features over 200 microplastic sculptures and 15 paintings, which have been created with upcycled plastic. The Ubiquitous installation was shown at the Patricia Ladd Carrega Gallery in New Hampshire in 2024. It will be shown at the Nesto Gallery in Massachusetts this year and at the Stairwell Space in Connecticut in 2026. Being involved with Beyond Plastics has given Tracy the opportunity to further her artistic practice by fighting for the reduction of plastic packaging in New York State. In addition, the courses she has taken with Beyond Plastics have provided the scientific support to back up her installation. And she works and lives in Brooklyn. Tracy?
Thanks so much, Kathy and Judith, and to my fellow artists. I think unlike my fellow artists, I came to working as an artist much later in life. And I started out as a painter, as Kathy said, working in encaustic and upcycled materials. And I used a lot of these upcycled onion bags from my co-op here in Brooklyn. And I really always, cared about the environment and belonged to the co-op and, marched for all the right causes. But I think it was really working with this upcycled materials and realizing how much there was of it that I realized that plastics was such a big issue. So the art really brought me to the plastics issue and got me involved with Beyond Plastics. And I've been focusing my attention on helping to get the packaging reduction bill passed in New York State. So as you can go to the next slide. So I had always wanted to do three-dimensional art, to do sculpture, and I finally in 2022 took a class in encaustic sculpture, and I decided after that class that I was going to create this immersive installation about microplastics, knowing nothing about installation art. I, really knew nothing, and I just sort of said, oh, I can do this. And I decided to call the installation Ubiquitous because I knew that microplastics were everywhere. And I went to France. This is pictured me at a residency in France, and I spent the time trying out different ways to create sculpture with encaustic. You can go to the next. And finally began to focus on creating wire mesh sculpture and covering them with plaster bandages and encaustic and texturing them with these upcycled bags. So the bags don't live in the pieces, they're used more like a stencil. Funnily enough, the biggest issue I found was, well, first of all, I didn't know how long it would take. I started in September of 2022 and didn't finish creating the installation with over 200 sculptures until July of 2024. And finding the right color combination where the sculptures kind of stood for themselves and didn't get lost in the color was really one of the most challenging parts of it. And at the end, I decided just to go with a very simple, creamy white look so the shapes and the forms and the message could stand out. Next slide. When I started doing this project, it was hard in 2022 to find out a lot of information about microplastics. And basically what I was learning was microplastics were everywhere on the planet, from the deepest sea to the highest mountain, and every part of the body they looked at, they found microplastics in, but nobody at that point was able to say they were a problem. And sort of my first premise when I wrote my first artist statement about Ubiquitous was, microplastics are in our bodies. Let's reduce plastic now and not wait to find out if they're harmful. Just seemed like it was a good bet that we shouldn't have plastics in our brains and hearts and lungs. So I filled the large sculptures with the items that were most likely to create microplastics. So there's like a tire, there's synthetic clothing and carpeting, there's things that come from the sea, there's bottles, medical waste, that sort of thing. So they each, the large sculptures encase sort of the big problem areas for microplastics. Next slide. So then I took Judith's class through Bennington and Megan's class, and I continued reading and reading, and then it no longer became a problem to find articles about microplastics. They were in the Times, the Journal, even my doctor's office was sending me notes about microplastics. Next slide. And it became very clear that microplastics were in all of our body parts and that they were posing a risk to human health. So I know there's some new people here, so I am just going to say a couple of microplastics facts. Patients with microplastics in their heart arteries had a higher risk of heart attack, stroke, and early death. Microplastics in human testicles were linked to decreased sperm count. Studies have shown that people with dementia have more plastic in their brain, microplastics, than people who don't. And that the chemicals that leach from these plastics have been tied to neurological disorders, obesities, immune system diseases, cancer, So this stuff is bad. It's really bad for us. So go next, please. So back to the installation. I really wanted the installation to feel immersive, so people were feeling the way as if they were immersed in the microplastics, just as microplastics are immersed in us. So I did hanging sculptures and floor sculptures and wall sculptures. And my goal was to bring people into the sculptures, into the installation by the beauty of the pieces. And then when they got there, to start telling them the information about microplastics. And I'm sure my other artist friends will say this, finding this balance of trying to share information without sounding pedantic and turning people off is a real, for me, it was a real trying to find a balancing act to get people in, have them hear about it and not sort of turn off and be like, I don't want to hear about this. Okay, on the next slide, please. One of the things that I found was interesting is everyone, when they heard about all the facts, they wanted to know, well, what should I do? And Judith and Megan were very helpful with me, not only clearing my facts, but also helping me come up with a list of tips. So when people come to the installation, they can get tips of things that they can do in their own lives. You know, when I started this project, I had no idea really what I was doing. I didn't know how I was going to store 200 sculptures. I didn't know how I was going to get them from one place to the next, but I just knew that I felt compelled to tell this story. And I really believe that if there's a story you want to tell, you should just bite the bullet and get out there and try it. And your community will lift you up. And, you know, you'll fail and it'll be harder and take longer, but if the story is worth telling, then go for it. I also, this is a hard one, but I think it was really helpful that I started this in 2022. So by the time it became so relevant, I had already finished the project. But obviously that's quite hard to do, to sort of get in front of things. I was just a little bit lucky. Next slide. So funnily enough, at that same climate march where Judith was carrying that beautiful poster, I met a young woman who said to me, wow, my mom owns a gallery and she's really into the environment. I think you should meet her. So if it were not for hanging out with Beyond Plastics people on Broadway for 2 hours, waiting for the march to start, I would never have shown in this great Gothic barn in Sandwich, New Hampshire. So thanks to Beyond Plastics for that. And then the next slide. And as I said, I'm doing, showing it again in Massachusetts this year in September, and then at the Stairwell Space in Bridgeport, Connecticut in 2026. And I found that not only the people that come see the show, but the posting on social media has really helped share the message as well. And I have people like texting me all the time saying, I just switched to class, or I'm going to join you in Albany to do this. So I think that, yes, it's really important to get the show into spaces for people to see it in public. But I think also just the idea of it has been helpful to help encourage change. So I'm always looking to share the message, and I appreciate everything that Beyond Plastics has done to help me, and thank you for letting me share my story tonight.
Thank you. Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Christy. Thank you, Katrin. That was amazing. That was just incredible. And I know we have questions. So we've got some time. If anyone would like to raise your hand, or if that is how we can do it, if that's the best way we can do it, or should we have folks put it in the chat?
Well, why don't we take the slide down so everyone can see each other? Andrew, do you know how to do that?
I'll end it for you, Kathy. Oh, there we go. And I've opened up the chat as well as people can unmute themselves either. So either which option that works for you.
Do we have anyone who has a question? Allison.
Hi, everyone. My name is Allison Daza, and I know that this is on showcasing plastics in art, but I do have a question about how do I say this? Talk to people about, I guess, would it be considered bioplastics compared to glass? I work for a color company, so I work in the beauty industry. And they used to use a lot of glass, and they decided to go more into using sugar and incorporating that into plastics, mostly because of shipping and energy is what they say. And so I'm struggling with trying to do my own program at my salon to basically have people come in and then I fill up a glass container for them with something that I have. But I didn't know how maybe I should go about that conversation if I do have a conversation with the business, or if they do have something to say, and that maybe plastic worse than glass in that sense, or is it on like a teetering system? Does that make sense?
Sure, good question. Kathy Jenkins, do you want me to field this?
Sure. Thank you, Judith.
So plastics is always the worst option. Even bioplastics or compostable plastics. The challenging part of the conversation is a lot of people who are using compostable plastics or bio-based plastics are well-intentioned, and sometimes paying more money for the packaging. But we've done some research and have found that a number of bio-based plastics have toxic chemicals in them. And Andrew, my colleague, just dropped our report in the chat on bio-based plastics, also known as compostable plastics. The other dilemma, and I have spoken to people who own restaurants or food trucks, is they often will pay significantly more for these so-called bio-based plastics, but then it all gets thrown out in the garbage like everything else. It only really gets composted at what's called a commercial composting operation. So you don't want to put the stuff in your backyard compost bin. And a commercial composting operation is very high temperature, and there are not many of them around the country. So yes, glass is heavier, no question. But if you can do reusable, refillable glass, that really helps a lot. And for beauty products, Beyond Plastics doesn't endorse particular companies, but I will tell you there's a really wonderful women-owned company called Plain Products, Plane Products, and they sell their products in stainless steel. And when it's empty, you mail it back to them, and they refill and send it back. So refillable is where you get the real energy savings. So Allison, take a look at our report, but you're right. You gotta kind of finesse the conversation and first thank people for moving away from conventional plastics, but then sharing, the sad reality of bio-based plastics. We may see a breakthrough at some point. I mean, I've been waiting for decades to see better bio-based plastics. There is a company just north of Albany called Ecovative Design. They got it right. They were making packaging from mycelium. They took agricultural waste and they had a secret, not so secret process. It was publicly facing, and it was a nice alternative to polystyrene foam. But unfortunately, it hasn't really scaled up to the point that I think they would like. And now they're making other really innovative, interesting products like fake meat and fake leather. But check out Ecovative Design. We've been hoping that companies like that would really take off.
We have another question. I'm sorry, I kept trying to type into the chat Ecovative and it kept auto-correcting it to evocative. I don't know why it was doing that. But we have another question. This one is for Christy from Addie. Christy, can you speak to how you connect the plastics and what material the containers you built are made of? I've found it hard to find non-toxic adhesives.
That's true. It really brings you home to the issues surrounding recyclables, that they're all made of different resins that don't get along. They don't play nicely. A lot of them are not stable. So you think you've got a bond, and then you come back and it's not a bond anymore. So I am very much opposed to any toxic glues. So I will avoid them like the plague. I'm sure I have a few in the drawer, but I really avoid it if possible. So I have found our good old friend, hot glue, works really well with the anxiety and the insecurity of plastic, because heat joins two different kinds of plastics together. So I do like the hot glue. And then if that doesn't work, because some plastics are kind of like oily, and they may not appear that way when you're working with them, but they may like exude oil over time. So then I use a mechanical bond. Like generally I'll either drill or stick a push pin through and wire things together. But I don't think you have to use anything toxic. And then the other thing, like Tracy mentioned, is those wonderful net bags that are too beautiful and too lethal to ditch. I mean, they're just so functionally amazing how strong they are, and how beautiful they are, and come in all colors. I did a whole series with them and birds from art history that were struggling with violence and survival, but I didn't have time to show them with my 10 slides, my lousy 10 slides. But anyway, I do really like the net bags for joining things. And as well, I weld. So I kind of make an armature and I jam things in. So that is a big help.
Do we have another question from anyone? I'm not seeing anything in the chat. If anyone wants to raise their hand. Sharon?
Yes, good evening. I just want to thank all you wonderful ladies for this excellent program and initiative of the artists, bringing the awareness to the masses, and great work. I would love, as a mother, I would love to see your work engage the young generation, because it's almost like an education that we need for the young ones, to convince them first about the importance of what you do to save the planet, that they are part of this movement. And that's how they might insist on the older generation and boss their parents to do the same. So great job, and thank you so much for all that you do.
Sharon,
Excellent.
I couldn't agree with you more. My nephews are like constantly policing their parents now. They've learned things at school, and it's fantastic, because I think they really like embrace it, and things like cafeteria culture and these kind of things, which are getting into the public schools. I totally agree that the kids are the way we're going to fix this problem.
We have a few other questions. Barbara Cooper.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks to all the artists who spoke. And I also have been working with some plastics in my own work. But I'm really being confronted with an irony in that I've tried to get plastic out of my kitchen, my bathroom, and every other part of my life. And yet here I am collecting it in my studio, manipulating it, working on it. And I'm just wondering, there's a certain kind of irony there. And am I exposing myself to more just from all of the handling, maybe the microplastics in the air, or this or that? And I'm wondering if that's an issue for any of you. Thanks.
I know for me that when I work with certain materials, I do wear a mask, and like a really sexy looking one that's like, really a serious one. And, you know, especially like if I'm work with fire and like you're putting fire and it starts melting some of this plastic, that's just fumes coming out. So I know for me that I'm very careful wearing gloves or masks when I'm doing something that could possibly be toxic. And just a shout out for Eco Art Space. The three of us artists are all part of this group called Eco Art Space. And they do a class about how to make your artistic practice more environmentally friendly. And I took that, and it was a great way to look at your own process and see how you can improve it.
Natalia?
My question, excuse me, was very similar as well, because I work with plastics all the time and I worry about whether I am consuming more plastics as I'm working with them while I'm getting rid of them at home. And I think you actually answered it all, because then you also addressed melting the plastic. That is something I'm greatly concerned about. I think it's one thing to be able to protect yourself while melting the plastic, but it's still going out into the atmosphere. I have heard that there are certain temperatures where melting the plastic is safe and it doesn't release the chemicals, but does anybody know what that might be? I haven't been able to find any information.
I know
But
working in encaustic, if you go over 180 degrees, that can become toxic, but that's just talking about like this is paint that's made with resin and wax and pigment. So if you melt this over 180, it will release toxins, but I'm not sure exactly for plastic.
okay, thank you.
As a non-artist, I would just jump in and say, whenever plastic is heated, there's a real risk, including dioxin emissions. So if you're going to be melting plastics or heating it, you really need to do it outdoors and away from people. And if you have to do it indoors, you need really good ventilation, because you know what burning plastic smells like. It smells terrible, and that's kind of just an indicator of the problems. But just be extremely careful whenever, just like we're told, don't microwave plastic. Don't put food in plastic in your microwave. Just be extremely careful whenever you're heating it, and try to do it outside, away from pets and children. Sorry.
Thank you, Judith. I think we have time for one more. Kirsten?
Hi there. Thank you. So I am curious. So I have this fantasy of having some sort of outdoor public art exhibit of similar sort to some of them that you all have spoken to, but adding to it specific action steps. So in my fantasies, it's like multiple different exhibits hitting that kind of speak to specific policy points, and then giving people a call to action. And I'm just curious whether anybody has had experience either planning or attending anything like that, and specifically in how to handle like the kind of red tape of actually being able to put something like that on, like dealing with the towns and that kind of thing.
I can maybe speak to that just briefly. When I was planning my funeral procession in Fifth Avenue, I contacted every department I could possibly contact, the police department and everything. And then I gathered more information about the various rules of processions. And it seemed like what I was planning to do was going to be okay. It didn't need any permits and anything.
Mm-hmm.
But then I still went ahead and alerted the police department, the fire department, any police agent that was around the area. We alerted and we told them what we were doing. And we actually did fine. We didn't end up in the local prison with a casket or anybody, because I was really concerned that, you know, that they would stop this. And so I did as much, you know, prep work as I could, and it turned out to be just fine. But it took a lot of preparation and communicating and talking to people and just that.
Kristen, also, I don't know if you know this site, it's called Artwork Archive.
Oh, I don't.
It's amazing. Every artist should use it. But one of the big things they have is a monthly list of open calls. And
Okay.
I just was looking at the one this month, and there was a ton of public art open calls. So
Okay.
if you're doing it for the first time, it might help to like do a call for an organization that will deal with all the logistics. They just want you to come in with the creative concept and, you know, bring it to them. And so they, you know, you'll work with an organization, so you're not having to figure it out all yourself.
I love that.
But like, I think the Parks Department in New York has open calls, and the subway had open call. So if you get on some of these listservs, you'll see a bunch of these things are being asked for.
I love that. Great. Thank you. That's very helpful, both of you. Thank you.
But I would just sort of chime in that the concept of bad trouble is never more appropriate than when you're talking plastic. And I wouldn't be afraid. I know it's organizational. If you're doing a group show, that's a big deal. But I think guerrilla action where plastic is concerned, completely appropriate. And I'll just really quickly, I was working on site in San Francisco a while ago, and we made a fake hastily buried landfill with barrels popping out and oozing stuff. And a camera crew thought they had actually found a hastily buried landfill and showed up to film a news story, their scoop. And they were so disappointed to find out it was an artwork. And I got to say, that was really one of the highlights of my work ever, is almost getting busted for making a fake landfill because it looked real enough to them.
Wow. I'm a big supporter of pop-ups. So the photo I showed of the plastic tsunami, I can't believe we get it through security at the Capitol. Sometimes we have to go to different entrances, but last Wednesday we got it through, and then the artist and two colleagues from Beyond Plastics, you know, we came across this like beautiful marble giant staircase. And they turned to me and said, why don't we just like unfoil it here? And I said, let's give it a try. And it was there for like an hour or two. And the police officers were just kind of looking at it over the ledge. And I guess thought, well, it's quiet, you know, people can still walk by. Chrysanth is amazing. And we're so grateful she comes to Albany with her art. We're getting to the wrap-up point, and I want to make well, first, I want to thank everyone for coming. I want to thank the three amazing artists, so inspiring. And thank you, Kathy Jenkins, for pulling this all together. Two things, particularly if you are from New York, we are working night and day to pass the most comprehensive plastic packaging reduction bill in the country. And we have until mid-June to get it passed. And I want to encourage you to bring your art to this campaign. Show up at a state legislator district office and show your art. Let us know if you want to come to Albany, and we too can help you get through security and try to display it somewhere. I have to tell you, when Chrysanth's big plastic tsunami is on display, people stop and want to talk. And that is the power of art. So if you have, I know you can't do something new within the next few weeks, but if you have something existing, go to your town park, go to your state legislator's office, go to City Hall, and bring attention to this bill. And then the second thing is please support Beyond Plastics. We are slowly growing. We started about 5.5 years ago with one part-time staff person. That was me. We're now up to 17 staff, which 17 sounds like a lot, but we're taking on the plastics, the fossil fuel, and the chemical industry all at once, which is a little nuts. But we actually get stuff done, and we're building the grassroots movement against plastic pollution from the bottom up. So if you are so inclined, go to our website, because we know just how wealthy artists are. But go to our website, try to make a donation, or talk to someone you know who might want to support. And we particularly need funding in the next few weeks. I want to tell you the Albany schedule. So if all goes well, we get this bill through both houses of the legislature by mid-June, and then we'll have a couple months to try to convince Governor Hochul to sign the bill without weakening it. And again, an opportunity for art. We can follow the governor and get, there's an art exhibit somewhere. She's more likely to come over and talk to an artist as opposed to a bunch of people just handing out flyers. So just kind of think creatively on how your art as a tool can really affect substantial change. And getting a big plastic reduction bill in New York done is significant. No offense to Rhode Island, but Rhode Island is small. We get this through New York, other big states will follow. We're working on this in New Jersey as well. And what I've heard from a lot of people is we need a win. It's so grim to watch what's unfolding with our federal government. The EPA budget is proposed to be cut by 55%. No federal agency is allowed to talk about the social impacts of climate change anymore. We have to resist what's happening at the federal level, but I think getting a big bill like this through New York will really encourage people around the world to keep working on plastics. So thank you for everything you are doing. And let's keep in touch. Beyondplastics.org. Your art is amazing. Keep going. Good night, everyone.
Night. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.